Eagles Entertainment.
With the 21st pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we've got another fun show for you today as I welcome in three people to discuss a bunch of players. And I think it's fair for me to say that this will be a bit of a defensive-centric episode, especially in the first couple of segments, because in Pick 6, I welcome my friend Greg Cosell to talk about the top pass rushers in this class. Who are they? How do they win? What schemes do they fit in? What traits do they all share? We're going to hit on all of that with Greg at the top of the show, and then we will then transition to Mr. Relevant, where I welcome in really one of my favorites to follow on Twitter when it comes to evaluation of defensive back play, and that's former NFL defensive back Eric Crocker. And today, we're going to just hone in on the cornerback position with Eric to talk about the strengths, the weaknesses, scheme fits. He's got rankings of the top corners. We're going to talk all about the top names at that position in the NFL draft. And afterwards, we will then jump into Draft Buzz, where Ben Fennell and I, we're back into the mock draft business. Trevor Sikkema from the Draft Network dropped his most recent mock draft, and there was a lot of fun situations to break down in that piece, which you can go find over at the Draft Network. So Ben and I will get into that before we wrap the show up with our draft mailbag, where once again, we've got a few questions from you at home, 3 in fact, and we'll do that to finish this episode up. Before we get things started, I wanted to remind you once again about jumping onto our Apple Podcast page and leaving a rating, leaving a comment. That's the best way to get your voice heard here on the show. And not only that, but it helps us in terms of being able to push the show up the ratings and make it more visible for people looking for podcasts about the NFL draft. So head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. We will answer your question. If you've got a question, we'll answer it. It could be about a specific player, position rankings, a mock draft, really whatever it is. You leave it there. We'll hit on it on the very next episode. And right now, the queue, we're getting close. I hit on a bunch of these questions here today. So if you want your question answered, all you have to do is just jump right on, leave your question in the comment section, and we'll get to it here very soon. Before we get this show rolling, I wanted to also remind you guys to go check out the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. We dropped 2 episodes this week that I think really no matter what team you root for in the NFL, I think you'll enjoy it. First up, I talked with former Super Bowl winning head coach Brian Billick with the Baltimore Ravens about the process of creating and maintaining a playbook. What goes into that for a coach, and how does that impact the weekly game plan and teaching players? It was a really fun, informative conversation, really kind of peeling back the curtain on a part of the process for coaches that fans don't hear much about. So it was a really fun conversation. Really enjoyed that one with Coach Billick. And then another episode that actually dropped yesterday, Ben Fennell and I broke down the tape on Pro Bowl tight end Travis Kelce, one of the best tight ends in recent memory in the NFL. What did the film show us about his success, and how does that apply to a guy like Kyle Pitts in this NFL draft? It made for a really fun conversation that, again, no matter which NFL team you root for, I think you'll enjoy it. And that's my goal, not just on this show, but also over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. So, that being said, well, enough about Eagle Eye. Let's get now to the Journey to the Draft podcast. We're here to start things off with Pick 6.
Now it's time for Pick 6.
All right, let's start things off here on Pick 6 with my friend Greg Cosell as we get ready to talk some pass rushers, Greg. This will be a fun group to break down.
Yeah, and I'm told that pass rushers are kind of important in the NFL, so it's a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, no question. And what makes this class so interesting, Greg, is that usually every year, there's a Chase Young or a Myles Garrett, the generational pass rushers that come along every single year, apparently. This year, yeah. We don't have one, right? There's not that universal guy in the top 5 or top 10 that, everybody's really, really excited about. But there are a handful of players that, everyone assumes are going to go in the top 40, top 50 picks of this draft that I think are interesting to kind of talk about it. And one guy I'll start things off with is a player who did not play a down this year and is seen by some as a top 10, top 15 overall talent in this draft out of Miami, Greg Rousseau. And I know you studied Rousseau last summer. I'm interested to kind of get your thoughts on him and how he ultimately translates to the NFL. This is a guy that has not played a lot of football, at least along the defensive line. I believe he played wide receiver and safety in high school.
Yeah, and I watched him last summer, and I watched, 1, 2, 3, 4. I watched 6 full games of Rousseau. And obviously he's got the kind of size, Fran, that you can't teach, yep. And that's a trait. We know that size is a trait. And he's got other things that go well. With that size comes length. He is athletic. I wouldn't call him explosive, but he's athletic.
Yep.
Obviously, he has great arm extension. He's got some functional flexibility. He's not bendy, but he's got some functional flexibility. He has that speed to power trait. He can redirect. He's not sudden as an edge rusher.
Yep.
I thought watching him last summer from his 2019 tape, I thought speed to power was his most effective pass rush move.
Let me ask you a question with him, because a lot of his production came when he lined up inside, and not necessarily, we're going to kick him down to play as a 3 technique. They would put him as a 0 tech and kind of some exotic sub front looks and kind of get him isolated on centers, and he would do work, right? And he was very, very productive from that spot. How do you look at that when you're projecting him to the NFL? Because you don't know for certain that is how he's going to be used in the NFL. And some of those you would say, I don't know if that's a translatable look at what he's going to be asked to do on a down by down basis. How do you kind of look at that?
It's a great question, because I made that point that he aligned inside in multiple positions in sub fronts, snaps at 0, at 1 technique, in 3-man, a lot of 3-man sub fronts in 2019. And he was the 0 technique. And then he was the 3 technique at times. So, I think it wouldn't surprise me if in sub fronts he did get moved inside at times. I think the big question teams have to decide with him is he truly an edge pass rusher?
Yep.
I'll give you an example. He's got great size, obviously. So when I was watching him, one player who came to my mind, and I don't know if you felt the same way, was Marcus Davenport.
Okay.
Because I remember watching Marcus Davenport coming out of college, and I liked Davenport. And if truth be told, I like Davenport's college tape and his transition and projection more than I like Greg Rousseau's.
Yep.
So I'm very curious as to how teams see Rousseau. I think that he certainly will check a lot of boxes because of that size and length. But I think if you're just looking at his 2019 tape, which is really all we have, I think you're projecting him based on what you believe he can become, not on what he consistently showed on tape. And that's what teams should be doing as well, projecting. That's the goal, because obviously he's playing in college and now he has to play in the NFL. But I guess my point is, to me, he didn't jump off the tape where I felt like, wow, this guy is just an absolute can't miss. And you started by pointing out Chase Young. Chase Young, you watched his tape and you pretty much said, this guy's going to be a great football player in the NFL. I didn't come away from Rousseau's 2019 tape feeling that way.
Yeah, I mean, my son is 19 months old. He could watch Chase Young and say, "Man, that guy's really explosive. That guy's really powerful." Maybe not in such eloquent words, but I would say he'd be able to point at him and say he's a good player. Let me ask this question: when it comes to a guy like that, that's got that length and that ability to kind of use that to his advantage, do you kind of if you compare him to other pass rushers that we'll get to? How much does that length kind of come into play for you? Is that going to be like a team by team thing, scheme by scheme deal? Or are you like, that's something that is going to be really important for his development moving forward?
I mean, theoretically it's important, but there's a downside to the length as well. It's like the old expression, you pray for rain, you got to deal with the mud. I think when you're that long, and he had a tendency to play high at times.
Yes.
And I think that comes with the length. And what that does is that significantly minimizes both the power, the leverage, the athleticism, the flexibility, because there were times I thought he played stiff-legged and rigid in his lower body, and that will always get you beat in the NFL. So I have questions about him. Now, I understand a very good friend of mine is who actually worked on the Matchup Show, was at the University of Miami and helped recruit him. And he apparently is an unbelievable kid, will do all the right things. So I'm sure he will work extremely hard. But as you and I both know, sometimes that knack for playing high and upright, that's a hard thing to coach out of someone.
Yeah, and as you said, it's not necessarily about what he is now. It's what he's going to be down the road. I think when you compare him to some of these other pass rushers, you would say that, look, these guys are better players in 2021, but what are they going to look like in 2025? And where is this kid at that point? That's what all teams are going to be trying to project with him moving forward. Let's go to a guy that would have been his teammate this year, where they were teammates last year, Jalen Phillips, who was redshirting a year ago after transferring from UCLA. He was also recovering from an injury. He was putting on weight, got a little bit bigger and stronger last offseason to get ready for this fall, and then had a big year. Former #1 recruit coming out of high school down there for the Hurricanes. What did you see from him on film from 2020?
Now, I'm not going to compare him to Chase Young. Okay, Chase Young's in a class of his own. But I thought of all the edge rushers I've watched to this point, and I've watched the ones who were considered the top ones. I mean, there's always the fun, as you and I both know, of watching guys who we don't necessarily know a lot about. Sometimes you get surprised. But of all the guys who were considered the top guys, I liked his tape the most. I liked his traits the most.
Interesting.
He's got size, length, athleticism. He's sudden. He's explosive. He's flexible. He's got power, balance, competitiveness. To me, he checked all the boxes. And, we know that he had some issues, which is why I guess the issue was more medical, because if memory serves me correctly, maybe this, I think UCLA DQ'd him medically.
Yes.
But I mean, this year he played in all the games, didn't miss any games. So I don't know what that means as far as NFL teams when they, do all that work on him. But I think he's got great twitch. He's sudden. I thought his balance was really good. He had elite movement and change of direction. He was rarely on the ground. To me, he's a 4-3 D end that if you're a 4-3 base team like a Mike Zimmer in Minnesota, that kind of defense, to me, Jalen Phillips fits that about as well as you could fit it.
To me, I want to ask you a question, because not necessarily that Phillips is this guy, but when you look at a player that won in so many different ways, the flashes were just so good with that player. How do you kind of juxtapose a guy like that versus someone who just consistently down in, down out? You're like, man, this guy just consistently pops off the film. Maybe the flashes are not as high, but he more consistent on a down-to-down basis. How do you look at that when you're looking at a defensive lineman? It's
a great question, because you and I both know that even great defensive ends are not getting, 20 quarterback pressures and 6 sacks a game. That doesn't happen, So I try to, if I'm watching a full game, and that's what you and I do, we don't just watch highlights. We watch full games on coaching tape. So if I feel like I'm not seeing plays being made, what I try to do is I watch each snap as a separate snap. So very often plays go away from you. Very often it might be a quick game throw in which no one's going to get there. Yep. So I try to make it, in my evaluation, I try to figure out, okay, why does it appear that he's not a factor? And, I come to my own conclusions, as you do, based on that. And there could be any number of reasons why that's the case. I did not feel, and I think you did a little more than I, and there's no right or wrong here, I did not feel that he, quote unquote, disappeared. I love that term when people say that, because you have to look at each play as a separate play. I just think this kid's got all the traits, and I thought there was no problem with his competitiveness, effort, and intensity. If I thought there was a problem with that, we'd be having a little different conversation. But I didn't think there was a problem with that.
Another guy that is really, really intriguing, and I really had a lot of fun watching his film, was Georgia's Aziz Ojulari. And I'm interested to kind of get your thoughts on how you viewed him when watching him. I know you talked about him a couple weeks ago when we talked about Alex Leatherwood from Alabama. What have you seen now focusing in just on Ojulari?
And it's funny because when all's said and done, both Phillips and Ojulari will be viewed as pass rushers in the NFL, but they're totally different because Phillips is long and probably weighs 260 plus. Ojulari is shorter, a little sawed off relative to Phillips. And I guess he'll probably weigh, what would you say, 240-ish, give or take?
Something like that, it seems like, yep.
Yeah, I mean, even if he's 245, maybe he gets to that. So I think that there's some natural power to him for his size. I think he's got really good bend and balance and his change of direction. I wouldn't call him twitchy in the way I would say Phillips is twitchy. But I thought his flexibility at the top of his pass rush arc with really good balance and body control to corner and close was really good. I thought that was, a specific trait that I honed in on. The question is, in a base defense, and again, you'd like these guys to play in your base defense as well, particularly if you're going to draft them high, even though we know the league is more so a sub-league, you still would like him to play in a base. He'd have to be an outside linebacker in a 3-4-5-2 front, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, look, at his size, I think there are some guys in the league that have shown, hey, I could play defense. I could play with my hand in the dirt, at that size. I am interested to see at his pro day what he comes in at. And that, I think, will give us a little bit more ease in terms of the projection.
Yeah, but I liked his I like the way he played. I think he's, like I said, I don't know. I'm curious as your thought. I didn't see him as sudden, but he's certainly very athletic.
Yeah, so to me, I thought he was really sudden and violent with his hands. I thought that that's where that showed up, and I loved. To me, like I like a guy that shows that, hey, I've got one go-to move. This is where I can lean on. I'm going to win with this move, and then I'm going to have a couple counters off of that. And I thought that showed up with Ojulari. I thought that he kind of was a little bit more advanced in terms of his hand usage and pairing that, with that the competitiveness, but then also, with the flexibility and the balance and body control.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that he showed a lot of strength and pop in his hands. I agree with you. I thought that his hands were strong.
All right, let's get to another player here. We'll go to the Big Ten, and we'll talk about Kwity Paye from Michigan. He'd be another guy like Rousseau who was moved up and down the line of scrimmage. What did you see from Paye over the course of your film study?
Yeah, I thought he was one of the more intriguing guys. I mean, I'm still finishing him up from this year. He only played 4 games, but last year I watched 7 games last summer.
Okay.
And, he's got, I would say he's an intriguing guy. He's got strength. He's athletic. I wouldn't call him, again, he's not twitchy because his body type is different. He's almost built like the old school defensive end, Fran.
Right. Yep.
He's not a short guy. He's not 6'2", but he's not sleek looking. He doesn't have that kind of body type. But I think he's a very good athlete. I think he can redirect. I think he has change of direction. I think he has good hands. I think there's a lot to unlock there. I think he could become a really good player. The question is how people see him because of the body type. He's kind of compact and dense as opposed to, sleek and athletic looking, even though he's a good athlete.
I was going to ask you about the athleticism portion of it with him because the reported numbers and some of the stuff that he's put out in his own social media accounts, eye-popping in terms of some of the stuff that he's going to do from a testing standpoint. So I wanted to ask you if that athleticism had shown up on film for you.
I mean, he's athletic, and as you and I both know, there's a difference between athletic and twitchy and sudden.
Yep.
And I think he's very athletic. And the thing is, in high school, he was on the 4x100 relay team. Yep. He was a long jumper. I mean, this guy has athletic traits.
Yep.
So that's why I said I think there's a lot to unlock here. I think that I like the player. I guess what I'm trying to say, I think he's the kind of guy that you could draft, line up at defensive end, and he'll be a really good player for you. Let me ask you a question. Who do you think is a better prospect?
Okay.
Okay. Kwity Paye or Clelin Ferrell? Coming out. I'm talking about
coming out. Sure.
Coming out.
I would say it would probably be Kwity Paye. If memory serves, I'm trying to think back on terms of how I
and I would
Cleland.
too.
Yeah,
and I would too.
And I know, I didn't view Cleland as a top 5 pick. I know he ended up going 4 overall, but I did like him, and I thought he was a well-rounded player. And I think that's an interesting comparison because when I watched Clelin Ferrell, I never imagined him as like for whatever it is, a multiple Pro Bowl type player. I didn't see him as that quality of impact starter, but I thought he'd be a really good, reliable player. And I guess that's kind of how I view Paye, but I think he's probably just got a little bit more upside overall.
See, I agree. And again, I'm not talking about where guys are drafted.
Of course.
Always drafted with the 4th pick, and that's irrelevant.
Yep.
We're comparing guys as to how we evaluate them coming out.
Yep.
I think Paye has a little more to unlock in his game as he continues to progress.
All right, so another guy that's got plenty to unlock is Jason Owe from Penn State, a guy just dripping with traits. Studied him over the summer from 2019 when he was a backup. Have not done the 2020 film yet, and I know you dug into it a little bit, so I'm interested to kind of get your thoughts. I know he finished the year with no sacks, but what did the film show you?
He has every trait you want. Yeah. Quickness, twitch, bend, short area burst, change of direction. I mean, this kid's an athlete, jumps off the film. The problem is for him at this point, and now you get into that discussion and everybody is going to look at it differently, is he has a pretty meaningful learning curve in terms of understanding and executing how to rush the quarterback with technique, nuance, detail. Just because he doesn't have a lot of experience. I mean, the kid's played 20 games, played 20 games in college, and I don't think he started that many of them.
He only started this year, yeah.
Yeah, and I think he played 5 games this year or something like that?
Yep, right.
So, I mean, but there's so much there. I mean, few edge prospects move the way he moves. I mean, he's got twitch, bend, and he's got every athletic, physical trait you want. And he flashed at times, a swipe move to clear the edge. He's obviously got stride length and closing burst, showed some speed to power at times. I think he can be really effective as a looper in TE stunts because the flexibility and the burst and the length. But he just needs to learn how to rush the quarterback. Everybody will look at that differently.
To me, like the profile that I think his defenders will always kind of point to will be Donnell Hunter. When Donnell Hunter was coming out of LSU,
who had 1.5 sacks, I believe, in
his career. That's it.
Yeah,
and I really liked Donnell Hunter's film, and I was a guy who felt really, really strongly. Hey, I know the production wasn't there, but this guy's got a lot of traits. I feel that way about Owe, but it's still that's a tough thing to stick up for a guy who didn't have that level of production.
I think that's a really good comparison. I didn't think of it. So that's a great comparison because Hunter was long, athletic. You could see the movement traits. This kid might even be more athletic.
I think so. I think he's got more traits in his body for sure.
Yeah. And Hunter was not a pass rusher at LSU, and he's become a really good pass rusher in the NFL.
I want to ask you real quickly before we get to our last guy, is there a position that a lack of production worries you more so than others, or ones where you're like, the production really matters here as opposed to another one?
Well, I think if let's stay on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
I would say linebacker, because if you're not making tackles, and again, you still have to look at every play and see where the tackles are being made.
Yep.
But I think if you're a stacked linebacker and you're not making tackles, I think you got to really look at that carefully.
Yeah.
Because you're right in the middle of the field.
Yep.
There's going to be plays to be made in the middle of the field. And if you're not making plays and tackles as a linebacker in the middle of the field, then I think that's cause for concern.
Interesting. All right, last question for you.
Would you agree with that, by the way?
I would. I think that's fair. I think, and looking around at certain positions, like even like corner, I feel like that's a position where production travels with you. I feel like if you are not a productive guy in terms of being able to locate and find the football, make a play on the football down the field, that's a tough trait to kind of learn and pick up. So that does kind of give me some concern.
Well,
there. That would be another.
I remember speaking to who was I speaking to years ago, going back with a defensive coach, saying that if a guy does not make any interceptions throughout, sort of his career and, college, high school, the whole deal.
Yeah.
He's not going to start making them in the NFL.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the guy that really kind of bucked that for me was Marlon Humphrey. Because I remember watching Marlon Humphrey at Alabama. He did not have, all the tricks in his bag in terms of being able to locate late and find the football and play it. But I'll tell you what, like watch him in Baltimore, like he doesn't necessarily need to in the way that he's used in that scheme. They play him in the slot so often. He's not attacked vertically where, he's out of phase and has to find the ball late. So comes back to how you're used as well.
Yep.
Ultimately in the NFL. Last question for you, getting back to pass rushers. Is there a guy that when you've been watching players, you're like, man, like I haven't seen a lot of talk about this guy, but I really, really like his film.
Yeah, there is. And again, as you and I do this, we don't care where guys get drafted. Patrick Jones from Pittsburgh, who I watched last summer and then I watched this year. And I really like this kid. And when I say really like, you know what I mean? I don't think he should be a top 10 pick. I just think he's really intriguing. I thought he showed meaningful improvement from 2019 to 2020. I think he checks a lot of the boxes. He's got good size. He's got length. He's got some natural quickness off the snap. He knows how to use his hands. He's got speed to power. What the reason he's not a top 20 guy is he's not truly bendy and explosive. You don't look at him and go, wow, he's not that guy. But he does have burst to the quarterback. I thought his 20 tape showed better ability to play off contact. I think that enhances his projection and transition to the league. I think he's a good run defender. I think he's a higher level edge prospect. Whatever that means, he's another guy who's a clear 4-3 guy. He's not a stand-up guy. He's not a linebacker. You can certainly move him inside and sub fronts. You can use him as a joker, which they did at Pitt in 2020 at times. So he's a player I like. And as I said, he may not come in the league and you're going to go, wow, he got 14 sacks. But I just think he's going to be one of those, like we just talked about Cleveland Farrell.
Right.
I think Patrick Jones is in that category.
That makes sense. I could see that. And when you talk about lack of production, that is not an issue with Jones. He found his way to the backfield for sure.
No, I really liked his game. I mean, like I said, because he's not a purely explosive guy, friend, you're not going to go, wow. And I know, I think I saw him a little higher degree than you did, but I think he's a good football player.
No doubt. Well, Greg, this has been fun. We'll be back here next week. We'll break down another 6 players or so. Thanks very much for joining us here.
Thanks, Fran.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, excited to welcome into the show for the very first time, Eric Crocker, former NFL defensive back, bounced around the Arena League as well, had a lot of success. You can follow him on Twitter just like I do, at Eric_Crocker. You can follow his work over at the Crocker Report. Eric, thanks so much for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Oh, man, thanks for having me on.
So I want to talk about how you view these top corners, because you recently posted your thoughts on, I believe it was the top 4 or 5 guys. And so before we talk about them individually, so you stacked them: J.C. Horn from South Carolina at number 1, Virginia Tech's Caleb Farley number 2, Patrick Surtain at number 3, Asante Samuel Jr. at number 4. And before we kind of get into each guy's on the individual basis, I just want to, when you look at that group as a whole, do you say like, oh, this is a great group, a lot of really talented players? Are they very scheme specific? Is that kind of how you view all of them? Or is it like, what's your overall feeling on the top heap of this cornerback class?
Yeah, just a really good class. I feel like I like, especially like the top 3. I mean, I was really high. I think I view, it's kind of hard because I kind of mix and match a little bit, but like CJ Henderson, he still would be the CB1 in this class. Yep. But I really like J.C. Horn, and then I think I would have Okudah, and then the rest would kind of follow as suit.
Got it.
Overall, I mean, just even after like the top 4 guys that I have, I still have to figure out who's my 5th guy.
Sure.
But even after that, I think there are a lot of guys that are really talented. And I think just from that standpoint, I like this class a little bit more than I did the previous class.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to start getting into some of these guys and why you have them stacked the way you do. And I guess we'll start right at the top with J.C. Horn. And I find it awesome that you have him at number 1, because everybody, it's been, the top 2 guys are Surtain and Farley in some order. So what is it about J.C. Horn that stands out to you that puts him above those 2 guys?
So I had a buddy that I played with on the New York Jets. And, he, every once in a while, he'll DM me. He was strength and conditioning for the South Carolina Gamecocks. And for the last few years, he would kind of give me a heads up on somebody. Now he's over with the LA Rams now, so he can't give me that heads up. But previously, he would just tell me like, hey, I know you're into the draft and stuff like that. Look at this guy. And every time, he's never steered me wrong. He told me about Deebo Samuel and the season he was going to have and how he was going to be viewed as a prospect and how his game translated to the NFL. And he also told me things like, hey, be weary of this. He told me about Deebo's weight, that it can kind of balloon and go up and down, and that can lead to some injuries. That has happened, right?
Sure.
He told me about Brian Edwards, and obviously, like, he started to be viewed in a different light as a prospect, but not being able to compete at the combine, and then that first year with the Raiders, kind of dealing with injuries, it was a little weird. But then he also told me about J.C. Horn. He was like, "Hey, everybody's talking about our big corner, the 6'4" kid."
Yep, Israel Mukwamo, yeah.
But he was like, J.C. Horn, that's our guy, and he was like, Crock. From day one, he stepped into that locker room. He was the alpha guy. Everybody followed him. He was the leader of the secondary as a true freshman. So when you hear things like that, it's like, okay, this is somebody that has some good stuff to him. And then you hear about the pedigree of him. Oh, by the way, he's Joe Horn's son. So you hear that. And now my thing is, sometimes when you hear about like guys who their their dads or whatever played professional football, it's like, is he hungry? Is he as hungry as the guys that maybe had to struggle a little bit more growing up or whatever? I don't know his upbringing or anything. But when it comes to J.C. Horn and you watch him on the field, he is just as much of an alpha dog on the field as he is off the dog. So that's the first thing that kind of jumped out to me, like his mindset. Because I try to look at what can you correct, what can you fix, and what are guys kind of born with? Their movement skills, their mindset. Those are things, it's hard to shape that later down the line.
Yep.
And when I looked at him, just the way he was able to like move, his transition, his feet, how big he played, his size, his aggressiveness, that dog, and then his mindset to take on different type of challenges, to shadow guys, to go follow. Like, hey, I'm going to guard Seth Williams all game. That's their best receiver. I'm going to guard him all game. I'm just going to erase him from the game. Now, Seth did have a good catch early on, but that didn't change the way that J.C. Horn played that game, eventually had 2 interceptions, forced another interception off of a pass breakup, showed the movement skills. I mean, even that, because you can look into interceptions and things like that, how he got his interception, a route that was coming across from the other side, him peeling off of a guy and undercutting and picking it off, like those type of things. Like just the way that he plays, and that showed up in every single game, the aggressiveness, the feet, him challenging, his physicality. Now, there were sometimes like he would miss a tackle and whatnot, but overall, he showed a different level of like tenacity than some of the other guys, and just like his relentlessness. So there was a lot that I just really liked that jumped off, and things that I can't coach this, I can't teach this. I can teach technique, and I thought his technique, it was hit or miss. Like his feet sometimes were a little bad at the line of scrimmage, so he wasn't as technical as like a Patrick Surtain. But even then, it was like he's so scrappy, he just gets the job done. So it was like, yeah, my feet are bad at the line of scrimmage at the start. You know, I'm kind of open up or whatever. But at the end of the play, I broke up a pass. Now, you know, everybody has their cons. Is he somebody who I just always want playing off? Like, no. But I thought even against Alabama, he gave up a touchdown on the slant, but there was also another slant from off coverage where he backpedaled and broke on the slant and knocked the ball away. So just to kind of see a guy with that size, that type of feet, to be able to challenge a guy like Devontae Smith at the catch point from that standpoint, I thought that was really good. So there was just so much that he had to offer, and his upside might not be elite like a guy we'll talk about like Caleb Farley, but just what he brings and the things that you can't teach and what he has and what he's going to bring in day one to an NFL locker room, I think those are things that's like, yeah, this is CB1.
So like there are 2 traits that you brought up that I felt, you know, when I look at the corners that I'm like, all right, these are the must-haves, and one is competitiveness and 2 is ball skills. And so watching him from 2019, saw plenty of competitiveness. I loved his tenacity up at the line of scrimmage. I thought that he competed throughout the route. He was impacting the catch point. But he can't. The big knock on JC coming into the year was, he doesn't have any interceptions yet. And you talked about, that Auburn game. I believe he had 2 picks, and I think those were his first 2 interceptions of his career. Obviously, now that production question isn't going to be a question for him moving through. But let's say he did come out last year and he had that low level of production. How much would that impact for you? Is that something you were like, man, like you'd like to be able to see more production on the football?
You know, it's a little tougher depending on the scheme that you're playing. Like, you'll see a guy like Josh Jackson from Iowa, where he's playing in the predominantly off zone scheme. And those guys are typically going to get more interceptions because you can read more concepts from off. You can see the ball thrown, and now you can make a jump on the ball and make a play and get an interception. Josh Jackson, I think he led the nation in picks that year with 8. Or you see a guy like Caleb Farley who plays majority of his reps are from off coverage. So he too is able to kind of read more, concepts and see the ball thrown and stuff like that. But when you're playing, and a lot of what you do is playing at the line of scrimmage, a lot of times you don't see the ball thrown. You see it really late. So it's a lot harder to really react and make a play on the ball, and catch it that way. So, just because of the scheme, I won't knock him as much for not having, a high number of interceptions. The biggest thing I want to see is just, maybe like catch rate, right? Like, are you competing at the catch point? That would be the thing that I would look for more with J.C. Horn.
With something like ball skills, is that something over, and not necessarily just to Horn, but just in general when you're watching corners, that if a guy flashes the ability, he's out of phase, then he gets back hip to hip, he goes back, finds the ball late, climbs the ladder, makes the interception. Like if you see that once, are you just like checking the box like, all right, he's got it, he can do it? Or do you like to be able to see it time and time again?
Yeah, that's my thing. I mean, I always want to see more of what somebody can they do it? And once I identify that they can do it, I do look to see how consistent that is, even if it's not them coming down with the ball or anything like that. But like how consistent, because I watched Kelvin Joseph, and we'll probably get to him, but I watched Kelvin Joseph, and he had 2 picks in some of the games I watched. But then it was like, those are the only 2 times I saw him touch the ball at all. Like there weren't like the pass breakups that I'm really looking for, things like that. So, I think people, when they think of like ball skills, there's different type of things we're looking for. Like, does the guy have the ability to make plays on the ball? And then does he just can't catch or whatever? Because there's kind of two sides of how people are looking at it. I think like when they're talking about Josh Jackson, tremendous ball skills. But it's like, well, he has the easiest job as far as being able to see his ball skills because he's playing off and he's reading concepts and jumping it from that way. But that was his strengths. That's what he was good at. But it's easier to see that than a guy who primarily plays press man. You typically don't get to see a lot of interceptions, but is he still making plays on the ball at the catch point? And I think from that standpoint, when you look at a guy like J.C. Horn, he was.
I've talked about this with Marquand Manuel over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast about like, all the different aspects of ball skills, and like just that ability to finish, like the hands part of it might be like the least important part of that. It's like maintaining that relationship with the receiver, then trying to find the ball late. You start stacking all those other aspects of that, and all those kind of outweigh it. So let's get to the next guy here. Let's go to Caleb Farley, a guy who's not played a ton of football in the secondary, high school quarterback, came to Virginia Tech as a receiver, made the move over the last couple of years. What did you see from studying his film?
Oh man, he was like a freak. Someone asked me last night to compare him to someone, and it's hard because he's a bigger guy. I don't think I saw somebody's scouting report and they were like fluid. I don't think he's as fluid. His movement skills are a little choppy, but he is an extremely explosive athlete.
Yep.
And when the ball's in the air, he closes really fast. When a guy gets a step or two on him, he closes really fast. His ability to close was something that I thought was really, really special. And a guy was like, who do you compare him to? And I was struggling to find somebody. I'm like, you know what? I don't know who I compare him to from an overall standpoint of like just, hey, he reminds me of this guy. But I will say his closing ability, and I'm not saying this is who this guy is.
Of course.
All right. But just his ability to close when the ball's in the air or when somebody has a step on him, it reminded me of like Deion Sanders. And like that's the only thing I could really compare it to from just seeing that like freaky burst. Yeah. Just being able to like close on something. Now, there are other aspects of his game that I have like, kind of questions about, but from that ability, I thought that really jumped out. Everybody wants to know like what kind of scheme he fits in and stuff. It's easy to see. Well, he played a ton of off coverage at Virginia Tech. I thought from that, and again, I'm talking about how well he closes when he puts his foot in the ground and goes down on the receiver. Doing that, it's like, well, the Broncos at 9 or 8, wherever they're picking, that makes a lot of sense to me. A team like that who he can press, I think he needs work there. Like, we talked about him missing some time due to injuries, being someone that was a converted receiver, those type of things. So they're still, and then really just not having a whole lot of reps in general playing press because they didn't ask them to press a whole lot.
I think he had like 15 or 19 press reps all of 2019, something like that.
Yeah, something crazy, right? So it's something where he's just not doing a whole lot. Now, again, we talked about with your ball skills and, got to distinguish the difference between something that somebody can do and can't do. And I think he can become a good press corner. I think he has that ability. I think he has the feet and the speed and stuff like that, but he just has to get more comfortable and more reps doing it. And I think he'll improve there.
How would you compare him to CJ Henderson last year? He was a guy like when I watched Caleb last summer, maybe it was just because it was so close to the draft. And I was like, I think he does a lot of the same things as CJ. They both have like kind of that long, lean build, that makeup speed for sure. How would you compare him to CJ?
I still think he's a little bit more of a freakish, bursty athlete, like, from that standpoint. But obviously, I mean, even with CJ Henderson, his ability to play catch up, there was a play where Jamar Chase kind of had a clean release on him going up the field in the LSU game, and he was able to really kind of get in phase and knock the ball away, and chase him down from that standpoint. So obviously, Henderson was somebody that had that recovery speed. And, even like you want to see CJ Henderson's speed jump out, watch him chase down Deebo Samuel on it was like a 90-yard play, but he closed so quick. That was something where, when you talk about Farley, he has that same type of capability. I think CJ Henderson from like a technical standpoint was a little more consistent. He still had his inconsistencies as well. Like he wasn't as consistent as like Jeffrey Okudah, but I think he was a little bit more consistent, and I think I felt like I knew a little bit more of what I was getting from him as opposed to Farley. But they both have like kind of their different little strengths and weaknesses and whatnot. But yeah, comparing the two, I would say I could see that as from just a build and athletic standpoint. I think Farley is a little bit bigger. When I watch a film like CJ Henderson, I didn't know he was 6'1", 205. And when I do my evaluations, I don't look at anything first. Like I don't look at height, weight. I don't try to look at any speed stuff. I don't try to look at any of their stats because I just kind of want their film to paint the picture of who they are for me.
I like that.
And then I start to kind of build off of that. So I didn't know CJ Henderson when I was watching him. I didn't know he was 6'1", 205. So when he measured in at the combine, 6'1", 205, then ran 4.39, I'm like, damn, that's some really good stuff. Because of Farley, I think he on film, and again, I don't know how big Farley is. I haven't looked at that stuff yet. He looks bigger than CJ. I think his movements are a little bit bigger in the sense of like, I don't think he has quite as good of feet I don't think his change of direction is as good, but I think he mixed up with some of that with kind of that bursty, explosive ability.
All right, so let's transition to the next guy. And coming into the fall, based solely off of 2019, Patrick Surtain was my favorite of this group. I loved him compared with Farley and with J.C. Horn. I loved all three players. I just liked Surtain a little bit more. So I'm interested to get your thoughts on what you like from Patrick Surtain and what you want to see that could be a little bit better.
All right, so okay, let's start off with what I like.
Got it.
I think he's probably the most consistent press corner that I've seen in recent years.
Wow.
His ability to play at the line of scrimmage and stay square and be extremely patient and get hands-on, like that's not something that's easy to do. There are a lot of people that be like, oh, why are you going to line up and press and not get hands-on? And what people don't understand is it's hard. It's hard to consistently get hands-on. Like, it's, and you have to I always have to tell them, press isn't alignment. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not a technique. Jamming is a technique. So those are two different things, and they don't have to go hand in hand on every single play.
Yep.
And different type of receivers, bigger receivers, easier to get hands on. Smaller, shiftier, quicker receivers, harder to get hands on. So when people talk about Devontae Smith, right? Oh, he's so skinny, people are just going to get hands on. Like, no, those are the hardest guys to press, because if you try so hard to press and you miss, your feet get stuck and that guy is gone. And then from there, your clock gets sped up and you're in chase mode. So, but when you watch Surtain, he was so good with consistently getting his hands on. I haven't seen that where it looks almost effortless. Like when I first watched him, I'm like, I'm kind of getting bored of watching him, but then I realized, man, he's just so technically sound at the line of scrimmage. So from that standpoint, that's something, obviously you can teach that, but I thought that was really good. That was good stuff. There are a lot of questions about his deep speed. I don't have issues with his deep speed. I mean, I've seen him get beat down the field a few times, but I thought for the most part, he did a good job of running with guys, especially like even on reps where you don't see him targeted, but he's easily kind of running with a receiver down the field. He was like a 10-7, 10-8 guy in a 100-meter dash in high school. So like, it's not a guy who's slow or anything like he can run. I think what people are seeing, and these are some of my issues with him. What people are seeing is he's not very sudden and he's not very twitchy. He kind of plays at one speed. So from that standpoint, does he have the recovery ability as a guy like Farley, right? Where he's just a freakish athlete and he can just move and burst even if he kind of gets beat. I didn't see that. I saw sometimes where he would lose at the line of scrimmage, and once he lost, that just was what it was. Like there was no recovering or anything like that. He probably would have to hope for like a late throw or a throw that's behind a receiver. It was just if he didn't win at the line of scrimmage, which he did a lot and very consistently, but if he didn't, he would have a little bit of trouble being able to recover because he doesn't have that suddenness. He doesn't have the twitchiness. Now, with that, he played in the slot a lot at Alabama, which is good, right? You want to see like versatility, but they didn't really ask a whole lot of him from that position. Like it was like kind of like almost like a zone position within kind of a man scheme where he kind of would just kind of drop off and play in space. And if somebody ran with him and he had to carry that, he would. But they weren't asking him to just like, all right, we're going to ask you a bunch of times a game to be a press man guy in the slot and really challenge your movement and movement abilities in space. They weren't really asking those type of things of him. So I kind of questioned, and it was weird. Like, why, as much film as I watched on him, it was hard to kind of get a gauge on how good are his hips, how good is his click and close, how are his feet when he's challenged, when somebody does something that he's not expecting, how well does he drive the other way, or can he correct his false step or mistakes? Those are things that were really kind of hard to see on the film. But, overall, I think suddenness, twitchiness, those type of things is almost something like you kind of either have or you don't.
Yep.
So I have a big issue, and this is more of a projection, that when he gets to the next level, and you have these guys that are more nuanced route runners that you're facing week in, week out. And he faced a lot of terrific talent in the SEC.
Of course.
But I would have liked to see him against his receivers. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would have liked to see him against the Jerry Judys, the Waddle, Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs. I would have liked to see how well did he guard those guys who have a high-end change of direction, good feet, explosiveness, stuff like that. Like, him against Jerry Jeudy, like that's what I really want to see. So hopefully I can get some practice film. And if he handled those guys very well, then I would have a much even higher opinion of him, because his movement skills right now don't tell me that he's that guy. But maybe film against them will kind of show me that.
If you get that practice film, hook a guy up. Just throw that out there. How would you compare him? Because one guy, I loved Tre'Davious White when he was coming out of LSU, and they're built a little bit differently. White's a little bit smaller, but do you kind of view is that kind of a situation where you could see him having that kind of success and where he's playing in that kind of Sean McDermott level scheme?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Tre'Davious White. That was like my first year of starting to be like, oh, my CB1. Like he was and I didn't label it as CB1 because I wasn't digging into the film like that just yet. But I know I tweeted out, this is my favorite corner in the draft. Everybody's talking about, Lattimore was Conley and those guys. I was like, Tre'Davious White, that's my favorite guy. I watched him at the Senior Bowl, his ability to play inside, outside. I think White had a little bit better movement skills. And I would think, like, if you're kind of going off of just like scheme, the tougher thing is, when you start talking about scheme, because White, he's in a perfect scheme for him.
No doubt.
I don't think that White is just a shutdown corner. I think, with what they ask him to do in that kind of cover 4 and 2 high scheme where, they'll even play him at the line of scrimmaging for where he might have to run with a guy, but he can pass things off. I think that works for him. I think a system like that can definitely work for Surtain. The issues I have is if Surtain is primarily playing off in like a cover 4, I've seen it with JC Horn, where he's backpedaling out and having a breakdown on a guy who's smaller, quicker, shiftier, and him being able to make a play on the ball. Can Surtain do those same type of things? I've seen him off, but even when he was off, it was like he's off, he's in the bail, and he's not playing with a lot of aggressiveness with the receiver. What I mean by that is like reading a guy down, having to really react to a guy running a curl route while he's bailing off and driving a pass, or he's off and having to drive a dig or a slant, and really squeeze it because, if he throws it right now, like, this is my guy. Those are things that really didn't jump out to me on film. So there's just a lot of questions with his ability to play off. So again, I keep going back to the Broncos because their fans have been the most active in asking me, like, does this guy fit us? Does this guy fit us? If I'm them, I probably would pass on Surtain. I wouldn't put him in a primarily off zone type scheme.
All right, last guy I want to ask you about, and that's the number 4 guy on your list, Asante Samuel Jr. from Florida State. Eagles fans know his father well, obviously playing here in Philadelphia. What did you see from the younger Asante Samuel?
I think if he was a little bit bigger, he'd be higher on my list. I'm not one that Denzel Ward was my CB1 when he was coming out. Jair Alexander was my CB2 when he was coming out. So I don't care so much about size. I just think this is just kind of a unique situation where you have these bigger guys that have these really good traits. When it comes to Asante Samuel Jr., when I was watching his 2019 film, his play at the line of scrimmage, he was really shuffling out too far, and it was like he didn't really look comfortable in press. They left him out to the field. He was primarily playing in the field for the most part in some games. There were some games where I saw him kind of play a little bit of boundary, but mostly like a field corner where he was able to kind of play off in zone, play with his eyes, things like that. And then he actually, especially against Clemson, they took him out a lot of times when they got inside the 10-yard line. So I'm like, well, maybe they feel like he played small. So for everything that was telling me from that game and a few of those games in 2019, he was a slot nickel DB. But then I watched 2020, and he was playing all over. He was playing both sides of the field, where there was field, boundary. He played more press. He looked more comfortable in his press. I saw him make a lot of plays on the ball, getting hands in there, forcing interceptions, things like that. His click and close from either a back pedal or a bail was really good, where he was challenging passes at the catch point and knocking them away. I think he has really clean feet. He gets in and out of his breaks extremely well, maybe better than anybody in this class, where there's just no wasted steps. He tackled extremely well. There are some people like, who's the best tackler of this group? And I'm like, well, you would think it would be one of these bigger guys. And yeah, they tackle well. But I think when you talk about like how his willingness to kind of go out of his way to make a tackle and not care about how big somebody is, I think Asante Samuel was like the best tackling cornerback in this class. So there was really a lot. He got challenged in an open field with his movement skills. He was playing like 8 yards off, and he was just playing it very honest, where it's like, I don't know which way this guy is going, but I'm just going to have to react. And the guy like jabbed left, jabbed right, then went corner, and he was able to mirror all those movements and close and it not look all weird. He didn't speed turn. He didn't do things like that, which you see like Farley do random speed turns, random things where you can tell like, his reaction isn't all that great. Asante Samuel Jr., he didn't have those type of issues. So there was really a lot to like about him. If he had maybe a little bit more size, and I'm not one that cares so much about size, I think like, hey, if you can cover, if you can do these things, and I really like you. The way I talk about him, I feel like I should have him higher. But right now, it's kind of hard to put him over those guys. But maybe the more I watch, the more I really start digging in it, maybe I will have him higher. But there's definitely a lot to like about him with his versatility. I like a lot of what I saw.
So you've been really generous with your time. I want to ask you one more question. Is there a guy or two that you studied so far? I know you still have a lot more guys that you want to get through as well, but has there been a guy or two you're like, man, like this guy's a good player. I don't know why he's not being talked about more. Maybe this is a guy I feel really good about his ability to transition to the NFL.
I'd say there's some unique guys. There was a kid I watched from what Appalachian State? No. Yeah. Corner. I can't think of his name right now, but he was number 8. I've only watched one game so far. Cornerback from Appalachian State. He reminded me a lot of Jeffrey Okudah. That's who he kind of looked like on film.
Was it Shamar Jean Charles?
Yes, him.
Gotcha. Okay,
Charles. I've only watched one game of him.
I have not done him at all. I just know he was first team all conference this year. That's all I got on him.
Yeah.
So this is all virgin territory for me. Let me hear it. Let's go.
I liked a lot of what I saw from him with just his ability. He looked exactly like Jeffrey Okudah. Now, maybe not like the high end, Jeffrey Okudah, like obviously like wasn't like a super speedster, but right. You could still tell that he was a really good athlete, jumped out the, room with the 40-inch vertical leap and stuff like that. Like his ability to kind of read down stuff was really good. He reminds me a lot. And I want to put out a breakdown of him because somebody just recently in the last few days brought him to my attention. I'm like, damn, this guy can play well. But again, that's only one game.
Right.
Another guy is the kid Benjamin St. Juste.
St. Juste from Minnesota.
From Minnesota. Obviously, he did a really good job at the Senior Bowl. A guy like him that's, 6'3", 200 plus pounds. I thought his ability to play off and look comfortable, breaking down on routes and stuff like that, to play press and be physical at the line of scrimmage. I thought he had solid hits for his size. He reminded me a lot, and I'm a 49er fan, but he reminded me a lot of Ahkello Witherspoon.
Okay.
Witherspoon had that type of ability where it was rare, really good movement skills for somebody that is really long and lengthy. Pause. So, those were things that I really like to see from St. Juste. He's somebody, and again, when on my little rankings and what the little tweet I put out, I said, hey, this order isn't random. He was the next guy up. So he might be a top 5 guy for me. I'm not sure yet. I still have to watch guys. I haven't watched Greg Newsome. And I know a lot of people like him. I did watch Kelvin Joseph, and I'm not nearly as high on him as other people at all. There's just far too much inconsistency. I see a lot of ability. He reminded me a lot of CJ Henderson, but like with his ability to just like his change of direction, his movement skills, things like that. Like that stuff was really good. His feet clean, all that, but just terrible eyes. And his eyes were so bad. And I said it in my video breakdown on Patreon, he might have the worst eyes I've ever seen from a prospect, where he does a lot of things really good, like as far as his ability, but there's so much inconsistency in his film when you really just watch him on a play-to-play basis, not driving receivers out of his breaks, missing reads in zone coverages, all these things that were just jumping out to me that really start with his eyes. So if he can clean his eyes up, then I might be talking about this guy in a different way because he does do things very well. But that was the one thing that was like, it's so bad. Like and I use the word consistency and inconsistent and stuff. And all these guys, it's not going to be perfect, but it was so bad from an eye standpoint. I was just like, I have to kind of pass on him being a high on my list guy right now. But if he can clean that up, I could see him being somebody that's a good NFL player.
You'll be interested to know. So Benjamin St. Juste first popped on my list. This was March of 2017. All right. This is when he was with Michigan at this point. And Michigan, they had like a spring combine where they're underclassmen or whatever. And they put out these numbers like, hey, yeah. And you take all this stuff with a grain of salt, but they put out the top performers at each position. And I say that they put out the 6'3" corner who was, he was just around 200 pounds at this point. He went sub 4 in the short shuttle. And he was like sub 6'8" in the 3-cone. And I'm like, whoa, I don't know. This kid's a freshman. I got to put this kid on my list just to stash him away. And, he never really got played too much in Michigan. He ends up transferring. He goes to Minnesota. But as soon as he popped up for the Senior Bowl, I was like, all right, like the cream rises to the top sometimes in that position in terms of movement skills.
So listen, when you say things like that, like, and I've kind of been getting, I don't want to say in this battle with analytical, Twitter and stuff like that, but there is kind of this, film guys versus analytics guy. And me, I don't know. All I know is film. So I'm not knocking any way that anybody else does anything. They knock my way of doing things, but I go off of the film. And hey, if anybody that's an analytical guy, if you guys are listening right now, please reach out. Like, I would love to learn it. Like, I want to give the best product possible. But saying that, those things that you said, I just talked about how I felt like he had rare movement skills for somebody his size. So you saying that he had those type of numbers that he did with the short shuttle and the 3-cone and stuff like that, it matches what analytical people would see as well. So the eyes do work, y'all, but yeah, I would like to learn a little bit more about the analytical side of things.
Real quick, Eric, before we let you go, just tell us, you mentioned your Patreon. Give us a plug. Oh, what's the stuff that you're putting out, and how can people go find it? Yeah. So, patreon.com/Crock Talk. All right. And my last name is Crocker. So Crock Talk. It's been fun, man. It's been building up. I just started like last week and I'm up to like almost like 40 patrons. I put out really good in-depth video breakdowns. I'll discuss things and certain plays with guys and like, it's like 11-minute, kind of like a film study of me just talking about like basically what we're doing right now, but I'll spend like 11 minutes on one guy and there'll be film, video evidence of the things I'm talking about, like the inconsistencies, the eyes, all those type of things. I've also done like technique breakdowns where, I'll talk about the, importance of like staying square, and I'll show examples of like a Tyson Campbell and, why he's able to do this and that and why this actually worked. As the season goes on in the offseason, like I'll get into like scheme fits and stuff like that. So say if the Eagles, draft, JC Horn, I'll put together, videos of, Eagles and what they do, and then match that up with what Horn does and how, that's a perfect marriage. Or if it's not, if I don't think it's a good fit, I'll also get into like matchups of the week. So like NFL, if it's, Jalen Ramsey against Tyreek Hill, I'll get into that matchup specifically and go through all the ins and outs. So a lot of fun stuff, man. Make sure you guys subscribe, patreon.com/Crock Talk. I just got into it and I have a great time with it. So I'm excited about that. Well, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for joining us here and shedding some light on these top corners. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
All right, anytime, man.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, hope you guys enjoyed that segment there with Eric Crocker. Now, as I welcome in my good friend, Ben Fennell. Ben, let's break down a mock draft. We did DJ's big board last week. We're going to get back into the mock draft roundup business here this week. We're going to go to Trevor Sikkema's mock draft, which you can go find on the Draft Network. I believe it's a 2-round mock draft. We're going to focus mainly here on round 1. And the first question I'm going to ask you here as we go through this mock draft here, Ben, your favorite pick in the top 12. So of those first handful of picks, what was the pick that really stood out to you as just a great fit?
Well, I love seeing 4 of the first 5 picks go quarterback, and one of those teams wasn't initially in the top 5, and that's the 49ers moving up to number 3 to take Trey Lance at North Dakota State. I just love Trey Lance in a run-first style scheme like Kyle Shanahan implores out there in San Francisco. Dominate the run game, get him on the move with rollouts, play-action boot, half-field reads, and then working in some more quarterback runs, more improvisation, more play extension than they've gotten out of the Beathard, Nick Mullins, Jimmy G era. So I like that fit. And you have to remember, a lot of these quarterbacks had dominant run games in college, were RPO offenses. So don't expect these guys to go and shotgun, point and shoot offenses and be successful. I think they need to be products of their scheme, products of their offense. And it's going to take a balanced offensive approach to get the most out of them.
I won't go into that selection yet because I'm actually going to bring it up a little bit later here in the segment. But for me, mine was actually a few picks later. That was the number 10 selection by the Dallas Cowboys, getting cornerback Patrick Surtain. As I mentioned with Crock earlier in the show, I love Patrick Surtain. I think he's a really, really interesting corner. And I think in a scheme like Dallas's, when we're, again, you're bringing in a new scheme under Dan Quinn, heavy cover 3, single high, a lot of zone coverage. feel like he really fits that kind of scheme. He plays opposite his former teammate there, and Trevon Diggs. Obviously, I think he's a good fit for that level of scheme as well. So Surtain, Diggs, two former Alabama corners, gives them a nice set of in the secondary there. It really kind of sets that defense up for success. And I love the scheme fit there. Let's get to the next one here, and let's take through the pick outside the top 12 that made the most sense in your eyes. I'll let you kick things off here.
Well, I think this guy just kind of fits the aesthetics of the team. And I think this Los Angeles Chargers team are a couple good offensive linemen away from making a serious contending run, not only at that Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC West, but for a Super Bowl themselves in Justin Herbert's second year. I think they have a really good defense now under Brandon Staley's tutelage as head coach, but offensively, just looking for that left tackle of the future to pair with Justin Herbert. And they're going to take Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech, who I think is a little bit more of a gap man style run blocker, more of a vertical displacement. He's strong, he's burly, and that fits what the Chargers had done in the past. A lot of inside zone, a lot of duo, a lot of gap stuff. Maybe not the most athletic guy, but he's a guy that had no problem getting up to the second, third levels, erasing linebackers and safeties, maybe getting out in the screen game. He's a guy that may not look athletic, but I think he's much more of a light-footed dancing panda type of tackle than his profile would suggest. But I just think he'd be a great fit for the Chargers there at left tackle.
I like that. And I think he's an interesting player, certainly to keep in mind, with the new offensive staff coming in and what will that scheme look like with Justin Herbert? I think that'll be a lot of fun just to kind of project what that system
and offensive coordinator, Joe Lombardi. Don't forget. Yep.
Exactly. So I'm going to go to the next one here. The Patriots at 15 take another player that we actually talked about in the last segment with Crock, and that's J.C. Horn from South Carolina. What do we know about Bill Belichick and that defensive scheme? It's a ton of man coverage. You see a lot of press man coverage. That's the thing. I mean, J.C. Horn does that as well as anybody in this class. And so just getting him up on the line of scrimmage, he can play some off man as well. But his competitiveness, his athleticism, his instincts in man, I think will show up really, really well up in New England. I think that's a great fit in the first round.
And I think they did a pretty good job with that, previous South Carolina corner. What was his name? Stephon Gilmore, former defensive player of the year. So pretty good track record out there in New England.
No question. All right, let's get to the most outside the box pick. So, a selection where that would surprise me, or we don't quite understand the fit, or just something that we don't often see that, maybe it makes sense to us, but we don't often see that kind of selection.
I'm going to take this one just a slightly different direction. So
okay.
work with me here. All right. I'm going to go with the Tennessee Titans taking edge rusher Jalen Phillips out of the University of Miami, who I think I really like his value. I think he's one of the more complete pass rushers in this class. But what are some of the issues with Phillips? A little bit of the off the field stuff, some outside interest, obviously the injury history that forced him to retire initially from UCLA, some concussion history. And the Titans, I think, are just looking for a little more stability with their first and second round picks. Obviously, Harold Landry came in injured with that knee injury. Jeffrey Simmons, obviously with the ACL, ended up, being an injured rookie coming right off the bat. Isaiah Wilson last year out of Georgia, pretty well documented that, that rookie campaign did not go as planned. Some off the field stuff, some outside interest stuff. So to go with another, kind of guy with some injury concern, with some off the field stuff, as much as there are trends, I think they're looking to go the other way with those trends and say, you know what, we need a safer player here, someone ready to go, somebody that checks all those boxes on the field, off the field, medically. So while they do have a track record taking this style, I think they're ready to go the other direction for him.
So I love that you presented it this way because, and that's the beauty. We talk all the time about connecting the dots. We're going to do it here in a second. But when you look at trends, the beautiful thing about trends is like, hey, this is a team that likes to go this direction. But if that direction is not working, a great example, Pittsburgh Steelers, Kevin Colbert, early on, they did not prioritize athleticism as much. And the pick that everybody points to was Jarvis Jones. Hey, super productive, but, did not have the height, weight, speed profile that would lead to NFL success. And then did not have NFL success, struggled because of that athleticism. So what do we see after that? That seemed to be like a little bit of a breaking point for the Steelers in terms of how they kind of targeted, especially defensive players in the front seven. All these guys were hyper athletes, TJ Watt, Bud Dupree, Devin Bush, go on and on and on. Stephon Tuitt, Cam Hayward, all these guys were really athletic players for their size. And so you may look at Jalen Phillips and say, all right, well, on one hand, it's, this is something that you outlined it. Bunch of red flag players. Will they do it again? Or are they burned by Isaiah Wilson? And now they're going to go the opposite way. I think it's an interesting one to follow for sure going into this draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I just think that, I feel like Jeffrey Simmons is a good player. Landry is a good player. So I'm not diminishing who they are as NFL players, but more the trajectory and the style of prospect they selected and how he entered into the NFL in those first couple of months and getting on the field initially. I just think they're ready to kind of zig since they've been zagging.
And at the end of the day, what we talk about is the number one need for that team is pass rush. And you just talked about a couple defensive linemen that have not worked out for them because if they have, we wouldn't be talking about defensive line being such a big need for that team. So I think it's perfectly fine to bring that up. To me, the outside the box pick would be the Jets trading up for a running back at number 16. So moving up to take Najee Harris at 16 overall, that would blow my socks off if that was the pick that ended up happening. Jets might trade up. Obviously, they've got extra capital with the Jamal Adams deal. They try and make a move. That certainly makes sense. Trading up for a back, that would very much surprise me. Although I will say Najee Harris definitely fits the mold for the kind of player that Joe Douglas would try and get. I think that definitely 100% fits his style for sure. Let's go. Let's get to the next one here. Favorite connect the dots pick. So, let's find some trends. What would be your biggest one for this mock?
I'm going to go with Notre Dame left tackle Liam Eichenberg going to the Pittsburgh Steelers here.
Yep.
Obviously, they took Chase Claypool out of Notre Dame with their first selection last year in the second round. Just having that kind of ACC Midwest feel to them just fits the Steelers, fits the AFC North. Obviously, they've dipped to that well before, like Steven Tuitt. But, just look at the picks in the past in the first round. Devin Bush, Michigan, Big Ten, Midwest, outdoors. Terrell Edmonds, Virginia Tech, ACC, outdoorsy kid. TJ Watt, Wisconsin. Bud Dupree, Ryan Shazier at Ohio State. I remember talking with Mayock, telling me about their decision to take Le'Veon Bell in the second round of 2013. They were deciding between Le'Veon Bell and Eddie Lacy. Eddie Lacy never played a game under 50 degrees. And that was a big reason why they wanted Le'Veon from Michigan State, the Big Ten, several cold weather games, several slop games. They felt like he fit the style of play and the expectations that the Steelers were going to have. And I just see that with Eichenberg. I just think he's going to fit into that style and just, he's already been wearing the gold. I think that's going to transition well out there to Pittsburgh. And they certainly are going to need a left tackle with Villanueva hitting free agency. So I like that pick there.
I mean, aren't there just players that you could just watch and say, like, this guy feels like a player for this team, or he feels like, this kind of, he's an AFC North type of player. There are certainly guys that fit that. You might watch a receiver and say, man, I could just see this guy, for the Kansas City Chiefs and, doing all the different things that Andy Reid asked them to do. Guys certainly have that kind of feel. You feel that watching film.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's get to mine here. And I'm going to go with his teammate, Eichenberg's teammate, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, going to the Dolphins at 18. And I believe this was out of a trade down. I think that this makes a lot of sense. And, we could talk through Zaven Collins. A lot of people will mock him to the Dolphins. I think that, you can go back and listen to the episode we did earlier this week, and my friend Alan Pupar breaking down the Dolphins and some of the trends we've seen. They've definitely trended more towards bigger schools. And where you talk about, Owusu-Koramoah versus Zaven Collins, could that be a deciding factor between those two guys? And again, that's what happens ultimately. You talked about the Eddie Lacy selection with Le'Veon Bell. I think that's an interesting kind of decision there for the Dolphins. If they decide they want to go linebacker, they parted ways with Kyle Van Noy. Part of that is because they have faith in Andrew Van Ginkel. But if they want to try and add a player at that position here into the front seven, I think Owusu-Koramoah makes a lot of sense. That would be one that I really liked, in terms of
and really quick, Fran. Just looking at the Dolphins picks here, I'm seeing a lot of mocks going offense to try to surround Tua with some more weapons, a backfield mate, maybe even offensive line. I find the Dolphins selections in the first round to be some of the most diverse and unpredictable in mock drafts at this point. And I think Trevor's obviously speaks to that, going defense. Several people have been all over the place with types of prospects, trade outs, trade ups, quarterbacks, skill players. It's one of the more unpredictable spots, in my opinion.
Definitely. I mean, anytime you're your team with lots of draft capital, you could go a lot of different directions in the mind.
You have capital and you have some needs. So
yes,
yeah,
exactly right. Let's get to our favorite trade for both parties. A bunch of trades here in this first one. I'll kick this one off because it's one you talked about earlier. I love the trade with the 49ers trading up with the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins got a bunch of picks back. A ton of picks back. And then the 49ers get their quarterback. And I do love that idea of Trey Lance in that offense. I think that would make a lot of sense, whether or not they moved on from Jimmy G in that scenario, or if they just want to let him play it out and give Lance the ability to sit back and learn. Regardless, I think Lance could come in and play in that offense day one. I think he could certainly find ways to have success for sure for Kyle Shanahan. So I do like that fit. I think it's a trade that makes sense for both. And again, going back to that segment with Alan Pupar earlier this week, he had mentioned Dolphins, that's a team that will do everything they can to move out of that pick at number 3. So we'll see if that's the direction they ultimately go. What would be the trade for you that stuck out?
Well, I'm going to go with the other top 5 pick, and that's the Panthers coming up to 5 to get Justin Fields out of Ohio State, but trading that spot with the Cincinnati Bengals, who obviously aren't in the market for a quarterback and certainly looking to field offers to get out of there. But the Bengals then are able to get Rashawn Slater and an early second-round pick that they turned into Eric Stokes and Landon Dickerson with their second rounder. So to walk out with an early second-round pick and still get a top 10 caliber offensive lineman, whether he's the left tackle or guard of the future, I think the Bengals really just need more offensive line talent in that room. I don't think you need to be so worried about where guys are playing yet. They have needs, they have holes, across the board. I think Jonah is a good player, a couple other nice parts in there, Michael Jordan, some other guys, but you need better players in that offensive line room. So to walk away with a Landon Dickerson, a Rashawn Slater, and a really nice press corner, Eric Stokes, that's a pretty good haul. And letting the Panthers come up, get Justin Fields, their quarterback of the future, I think that works out for both teams.
I like it. I think that would be certainly, we've talked about the connection there of Justin Fields to Carolina. Certainly makes a lot of sense on a number of different levels. Let's go to the Eagles selection here for Trevor. And he's got the Eagles staying put at number 6 and selecting Oregon left tackle Penei Sewell. And let's get into the blurb here from Trevor. Again, this is all from Trevor on the mock draft. And he said, maybe Howie Roseman will draft a wide receiver this early, but I doubt it, especially if an offensive line upgrade can be had. The Eagles plan to have Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks back, hopefully Jason Kelce too. They also hope health will be much more on their side in 2021. There is reason to believe they could go with Andre Dillard or Jordan Mailata as their left tackle, but why risk such a crucial offensive line spot on belief if a sure thing like Sewell is on the board? I don't think they would. So, Ben, let's get into your thoughts. Penei, we haven't really talked about the idea of Penei Sewell falling to the Eagles at 6. And if they were to pull the trigger, what would be your thoughts on Penei Sewell falling that far into the draft? And what do you think of him overall as a prospect?
Well, I think he's obviously an intriguing prospect with a lot of upside. He's young and tons of potential, and he might be an offensive line prodigy at this stage. But the phrasing of saying, spot on belief if a sure thing like Sewell's on the board, I just don't know if there are sure things.
There's no, there is no such thing as a sure thing.
So I balk a little bit at the phrasing there, and they were more than comfortable in spending first round capital on Andre Dillard to be that left tackle of the future. We've seen very little out of Andre Dillard thus far in his young career due to injuries, but I'm not willing to say he can't still be that and be the guy that made them take him in the middle of the first round just 2 young years ago. So as much as I would like to see Penei Sewell be the left tackle on any team in the NFL, I think he's going to be a really nice piece. It's really weighing your current roster, your other needs, and the weighing potentially some positional depth later in the draft.
We haven't done our positional previews yet in terms of talking about the offensive line, but to give us a little bit of a teaser, how do you view Sewell against the rest of this tackle class? There are some people that view he's far and away number 1 guy. There are some that say, oh, well, I actually like Slater a little bit more. How do you kind of view his separation from the rest of that group?
What he's put on tape is very intriguing for a 19-year-old to win the Outland Trophy as the best offensive lineman. And I thought he checked all the boxes as far as what you're looking for an offensive line, particularly a left tackle prospect at the next level. So, I think his slotting and evaluation analysis is warranted. It's just a matter of what the learning curve is, if he still has some development because he's so young, if he's going to be ready to go day one. There's other guys with better bodies of work and more experience, but they maybe showed you some flaws because they played a lot more. So, there's guys like Penei Sewell that only played really 1 year, or Walker Little that's been on the field in 2 years, that make this really tough to evaluate.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting case study just watching this class as a whole and how they progress, how teams approach it. We've talked about that throughout the course of the process, but it's going to be a lot of fun for sure. Well, Ben, this has been fun as always. We'll be back early next week to break down the rest of this class. I think we're doing linebackers early next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, and we'll talk to you next week.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
All right, well, great stuff there from Ben. We've had three great guests today, but we're going to wrap things up with three questions from you guys at home. We're going to start things off with JRod814, who left a 5-star review on our Apple Podcast page saying, "Hey, Fran, really enjoyed the show and all the work that you do. I was wondering where you would rank Jalen Hurts in this 2021 quarterback class. Obviously, he would be after Trevor Lawrence, and then maybe talk about your scouting report on him from last year and what you saw from him in 4 games that he played this year. Thanks so much. Go Birds." From Jared. So Jared, that's a good question. And I do love having those conversations, kind of comparing guys over multiple draft classes, especially when they can be stacked together. And I think when you look back at Jalen Hurts, look, there's a reason why he was a late second-round pick. I thought he showed starting potential throughout the course of his NFL career. He's got the size, he's got arm talent, he's got athleticism. We saw that in his limited time as a starter here in 2020 as a rookie. He needed to get a little bit better from the mental side of the game, getting through progressions, being able to throw with anticipation, things of that nature, poison the pocket. I thought he showed flashes of that as a rookie, and he showed good accuracy as a rookie, which that was really good to see. He needs to get better in some of those areas, but guess what? That's an area that a lot of young quarterbacks have to get better at. I think when you try and compare him, number one, to this quarterback class, I guess you look at that from 2 different ways, right? Do we compare Jalen Hurts, the prospect coming out of Oklahoma, or do we compare it to Jalen Hurts, what we know of him right now, right? Because where he is right now, we've seen him. We've seen him operate in the NFL. We've seen him have a modicum of success. We can expect that would be at least his floor, right? So I think when you look at Jalen Hurts, you look at him and say, okay, let's look at him as just the prospect last year, a year ago from now, to what he would compare to Zach Wilson and Justin Fields and to Mac Jones and certainly to Trey Lance as well out of North Dakota State. I would say that he would probably be in that same bucket to me as Mac Jones, and they're very similar kinds of players. I think when you look at Mac Jones, he's not going to do some of the things athletically that Jalen can do, but he's going to operate from the pocket a little bit better. He's a little bit more advanced in terms of his touch at all 3 levels, his ability to kind of get through progressions. It was a very quarterback-friendly offense where both guys, right? They did things a little bit differently at Oklahoma than they did at Alabama, but both guys were really set up for a lot of success with really talented players all around them. So certainly you can make that kind of comparison. I think both guys you would look at and say, okay, you need to try and find a really good set of circumstances around them to reach a very high level of play early in their career. I'm a big believer in the fact that when you look at how quarterbacks are able to find success in the NFL, especially over their first contract, not just year 1, not just year 2, but 4 years, 5 years, even going to 6 years, a lot of it has to do with situation. And there was a great tweet from Mike Renner from Pro Football Focus, a guy who's been on the show a number of times. And I'm pulling up the tweet right now, but I thought it really kind of plays to what I'm discussing. And I think when you look at just at the quarterback position, the situation changes every single year. And this is the tweet from Mike. He said, "It's interesting how quickly perception changes for young quarterbacks. After 2018, you would have been crazy to have Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson over Baker Mayfield. After 2019, you would have been crazy to have Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen over Lamar Jackson after Lamar's MVP year. And then after this season, you'd be crazy to have Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield over Josh Allen," right? It's so crazy, the perception of guys and ultimately how guys are able to find success. It's going to be a lot of that is determined not just by their own personal development, but how they're coached, the scheme that they're playing in, their supporting cast, their durability of players around them. All of that can impact every position on the field, but certainly can impact the quarterback. So I think when you look at all of these players, all of them have the ability to be a franchise quarterback. Are all these guys going to be able to step in right now and say, and put on the Superman cape and say, all right, guys, all right, Jacksonville Jaguars, all right, New York Jets, ride me to victory? That's not reality. That's not reality in today's NFL. That's not reality in today's real world of football. I think when you look at all of these guys, they all have traits that you can work with. It's about finding out how can you best leverage their skill set to lead you to extended success. And so for some of these guys, it might mean that you have to play a very specific way. If you've got Mac Jones, you're going to play things a lot differently than if you have Trevor Lawrence, right? You're not going to be able to do all the same things. Just like if you have Justin Fields versus Trey Lance versus Zach Wilson, all those guys are going to do different things. The offense changed a little bit when Carson Wentz went to the bench and then when Jalen Hurts came in, right? You're going to do different things that fit that quarterback. And I think with all of these guys, it's about trying to best figure out, how do we put this guy in the best position to succeed? And then you allow that guy to get reps. It's a really fun process that I love studying, and I thought that Mike really illustrated that very, very well. That's a long way for me to answer this question, Jared. So to me, when I would look at Jalen Hurts, the prospect, the second-round pick out of Oklahoma in 2020, compared to this group, I would put him in that same bucket as Mac Jones. So he'd be competing for like that fifth spot behind those other four guys. It's just in my opinion, just looking at that group. Let's go to the next question here from Yoho Checo, who left a 5-star review saying, I'm not an Eagles fan at all, but I found this podcast during last year's draft cycle, and it's absolutely the best one out there, successfully bringing together evaluators who do the work and have the credentials to provide independent analysis rather than summarizing groupthink. Yoho, I appreciate you saying that. That's awesome. And the second part of it, what you said, the Senior Bowl coverage is so thorough that I almost feel that they need to specifically highlight non-Senior Bowl players on the clock segments because the audience gets so familiarized with Senior Bowl players during the week of practice. So that's actually a pretty good, an interesting bit of advice, and I've never thought about it from that standpoint. So I'm glad that you brought that up, and it's certainly something I'll keep in mind here moving forward over the next few weeks. Maybe we'll do some more segments where we talk less about those guys and more about some of these low-name underclassmen or the seniors that didn't go to Mobile and things of that nature. We'll definitely try and keep that more in tune. So thanks so much for bringing that to my attention. We're going to go one more question here from longtime listener Sean Wolford, who left a 5-star review saying Kyle Pitts is the most polarizing prospect in this draft, in my opinion, given his talent and the positional value. So many people have said not to look at Pitts as a tight end, given his ability to win outside and even play X-receiver for certain snaps. That said, if you were to just rank pass catchers, where would Pitts rank for you in this year's draft? So, Sean, that's a great question, and I think a lot of people would offer differing opinions on that, and I don't know that you could sit here and say any of them are wrong. It's funny, we were just talking, I said this at the top of the show, we talked about this over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, myself and Ben, when we did a thorough tape review of Travis Kelce and the value he has for Kansas City and what they do to allow him to succeed. And I think you would kind of make that comparison to Kyle Pitts, and kind of where I've landed on it from a pure position value standpoint is this. It's almost like how I looked at Quentin Nelson a couple of years ago. Everyone would say, look, Quentin Nelson is maybe the best player in the draft. If you're just looking straight talent, where he is at his position, the level of success we expect, Quentin Nelson is the best player. But you're not going to take him number 1. You're not going to take him number 2. You're not going to take him number 3. So where would you take Quentin Nelson? And at the end of the day, I sat there, and this is not an original opinion of mine. I actually, if I remember right, the first person I heard just kind of put it this way was Bucky Brooks over on the Move the Six podcast. And he said, look, if you feel that Quentin Nelson is a gold jacket player, you think he's going to be a Hall of Famer, regardless of positional value, you take him. If he's that level of prospect, if he is the unicorn at that position, then you feel good about that selection. Now, I could see you saying a little bit, look, we the positional value, we really feel that there's a low chance of probability that he hits that level, that maybe we can find a tight end who could do similar things in round 2, round 3, round 4, round 5. Hey, and I'm not going to be one to disagree with you on that. I think that that's a very viable argument. There are smart people on both sides of the aisle on this discussion. I think when you look at Kyle Pitts and you say, we're just going to lump him in with these pass catchers, most people would say he's the number 2 guy behind Jamar Chase. And I think that that's a fair opinion to have. And I think when you look at his ability to win outside, to win inside, he's too big for safeties, he's too strong for corners, he's too fast for linebackers, that whole deal, he's a matchup nightmare. He plays the ball really well. He's a two-way player. We've broken down Kyle Pitts. We did a very thorough conversation with Greg last week here on the show in Pick 6, all about what he brings to the table. So to me, I look at Kyle Pitts as one of the best players in this draft. If you say that, hey, the positional value, we just can't take him here. Totally get it. If you also say, look, we feel like in our offense, he is going to be the focal point of the pass game. He's going to be a perennial Pro Bowl player. He's going to catch 70, 80 passes every single season at the very least. He's going to be up there as one of the leading receivers in the league. Yeah, then guess what? You've got a vision for how he's going to operate in your offense. Go for it. That would be great to watch. So to me, I think that you can make an argument either way. He's a fun player to watch. I'm excited to see ultimately where he ends up. So Sean, Yoho, Jared, I really appreciate everybody for all three of your questions. Great stuff there. Thanks so much to everybody that's gone onto our Apple Podcast page, left us a rating, and leave us a comment. Again, if you've got a question about a player, position rankings, mock draft, really whatever it is, or if you're like Yoho Checo and you've got a suggestion for the show, I love that stuff. Please, we're always trying to get better. We're always adding little tweaks here to specific segments or to shows and how we structure things. So if you've got anything for me, just go on our Apple Podcast page and leave it there in the comments section. Excited. We're getting closer and closer to the NFL draft. This show is really heating up. Excited for everybody that continues to check us out. We'll be back early next week. Myself, Dane Brugler, Ben Fennell. We've got another great guest here for our Blueprint segment. I love this segment every single week here on the show. We'll be back Tuesday morning right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
In just over 3 years, Eagle's Autism Foundation has raised millions of dollars for autism research and care. But this is about so much more than just fundraising. This is about making a transformational difference in the lives of those affected by autism. This is about bringing our community together. With inclusive, sensory-friendly events and accessible resources, we meet families where they need us most and where we can serve them best. Together, we're united in our mission to improve the lives of the autism community and to turn awareness into action. It's what we focus on every day in every way.